Hi everybody, I'm Bea, founder of Yes Parenting, and I am joined today by Scott Swain. He is a NVC trainer. NVC stands for Nonviolent Communication, and I'm really glad that you can join us today for this interview. And Scott, it is wonderful to have you here as well.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm feeling honored and looking forward to where we'll go with this.
Yeah, me too. Now, I just want to share with everyone, Scott and I first met in person in Austin back in 2012 when I was doing a 9-week road trip with my sons. And back then they were age 6 and 8. And Scott was very generous in hosting us as couch surfers. And it was a real honor to me to spend in total, I think, almost 2.5, maybe almost 3 weeks with Scott, learning about NVC. I've never heard of it before. And at first I found it really awkward. And I remember Scott saying to me, do you know what, it is awkward because although it's natural, it's really unfamiliar. And I've carried that whole idea of natural versus unfamiliar with me ever since. And it might be something that we can talk about a bit in this interview. But one of the things that was really brilliant about staying with Scott was that he helped me find a different language for the challenges that I was facing with my boys. And then also because while I was there, a huge change happened in my life. And I found out that my husband at the time didn't want to be married to me anymore. And I couldn't have been in a better physical environment because Scott supported me in finding an NVC language to help me navigate some of those challenging conversations. So it's a real honor for me to be here with you today, Scott. So one of the things that you shared with me is that for you, NVC is this really incredible tool for learning and practicing empathy. And I would look, can you expand on that so that the people listening can get a kind of a better sense of what on earth does it mean to learn and to practice empathy?
Wow, so that's big. And I'm excited to share that. First, I want to say thank you for mentioning. I didn't realize I had such a great impact. I know when you first came, actually, it was the first time I had heard of or experienced unschooling. And it seemed such a useful and wonderful way of dealing with children. It seemed like, and you were so committed to nonviolence with your children. You're so committed to honoring their autonomy and not, and being so patient with the hard situations that children can throw at you. So I was just so impressed by that. And it's kind of funny to hear you say that NVC was so hard for you in the very beginning, or at least unfamiliar, because you seem to be already doing it. At least the underlying intention was there. And more than that, it just seemed like you acquired it and started using it with ease. And I remember even wondering, wait, have you already read the book? And I think you said, I'm pretty sure you said no. And
yeah, never heard of it before.
Wow. Okay. So that sort of ties into when you talk about empathy and MVC being a tool. I like to say a tool and be real clear with that, because I don't want to assume that it's the only tool or the best tool. I mean, it's the best tool I've found for me. Mm-hmm. And it, there's a certain concreteness, a certain solidity to NVC, its practice that I enjoy, that really works for me. It's because you hear, or I hear people speak of empathy, and everybody, I believe all humans are, with the exception of maybe a few small percentage, that we practice empathy automatically, that we're born to do it. And I think most people see empathy as this feeling that you have, that And so they say, of course, I already know how to do empathy, and I do it with my kids all the time, or I do it with myself or my whatever. But and at the same time, I don't think that they are necessarily realizing there's a way you can do empathy, that you can show it and that you can practice it in a very action-oriented sense, well, with your words, so that not only does the person receiving the empathy feel it, realize it, and enjoy it, but also you're spreading how to do it. So here, I want to be sure I'm not being too wordy. Not really sure how much time we have here, and because I could go on forever and ever, and I'm happy for you to go ahead and guide me as to getting back to the point of answering your question.
Okay, so I really appreciate that you just shared. You're not sure how much time we have, because that helped me realize that I didn't even talk about time before we went live with the interview. So typically, these interviews tend to last around 30 minutes. Sometimes they're a bit under, sometimes they're a bit over, but I tend to go with a 30-minute guideline. So if you're happy to be in the interview for up to 30 minutes, then I guess we have another 25 minutes or so. And, I would really love for you to tell us a little bit more about the concrete nature of MVC that you love so much. I mean, I think I know what you're going to say, because I think it's possibly one of the things that I adore about it. But I'd love to hear more from you about that concrete nature of MVC.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, what I enjoy about MVC, in terms of being what I would call a concrete tool, is that it's very easy for beginners to pick up on and use. It has a formula that we can use in the very beginning to integrate MVC into our way of being. And once it's integrated, then it becomes a lot more natural and easy to use. And before that, it can have some challenges, because it may not, because people are going to say, what is this way that you're speaking to me? People don't usually ask me what's going on underneath my feelings. And that's in MVC, there's a jargon term, a term that MVC uses called needs. That's needs. And I have, in my 10 plus years of practicing MVC, I've decided that values usually maps just as well, so that sometimes we can use the word values instead of needs. But that's something we can talk about later. So back to the concrete, the formula that you can use in the beginning to learn. It's called OFNR, and the O stands for observation, the F for feeling, the N for needs, and the R for positive doable request. So the way that might work is, observation being, hey, I noticed that the front door was open when I came in, and my feeling about that is worry or some anxiety. I was wondering, why is the front door open? That's kind of scary to me. And then my need there would be security or safety. And my positive doable request would be, hey, can you tell me why the door was open? Or, hey, would you be willing to be more careful in the future and close the door when you come in? Now that there are some distinct different ways to use MVC. I'm going to give you that formula, okay, the empathy, the MVC type of empathy that we just used. Now, in the book, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, pretty much the first half of the book, you are using that kind of empathy where you're expressing your own observation and feeling and need and request in relation to, to you. The request part is always in relation to you. It's how can or us, how can we make life more wonderful for both of us?
Mm.
But and the observation is too, because you can only, well, okay, so beginner MVC, or what you learn at first, or what is to look inside yourself and to express it in that way. I see this, I'm feeling this, I'm needing this. And I really believe it's quite necessary to get it from that direction first, to understand yourself and your feelings and needs before becoming, before getting good at being able to guess at what other people's feelings and needs are. So,
Right.
so if we were to use that formula in the secondary method, it would be, hey, I saw the doors open. I'm wondering what you are feeling. So you would guess. So, hey, were you in a big rush? Were you? And I'm trying to think of now a feeling that would go with feeling rushed. Were you kind of excited? Distracted. Okay. So maybe you were feeling distracted and excited and whatever, and you had a need for efficiency because you're moving fast and you had a lot of things going on. So you left that door open. Is that what happened? And is that what happened right there? And as well as the whole tone of question rather than, I know what happened, you were doing this. So I think it's very important here to point out that the MVC type of empathy, we always want, and I'm being careful when I say always, but I'm pretty sure we always want to make sure we're expressing it as a question, because we don't want to tell people how to feel or assume we know for sure how they feel or what's going on underneath those feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I first learned NVC, a lot living alongside you, when we stayed with you, it was so freeing for me, this framework around it being about my observation, my feeling, my need, my positive doable request, because I had fallen into the bad habits of, well, you did this, you did that, you made me feel, and I hadn't been aware of those kinds of communication issues or habits really, until I had this beautiful simplicity of bringing it back to, well, what did I observe? What do I feel? What do I need? And what's the request that I'd like to make? And I think that that's so valuable, well, for all of us as individuals. But from a parenting perspective, when in parenting, it's so easy to have power over your child because, you're the grown up, you have the money, you have the knowledge and all that kind of stuff. It's very easy to have power over a child. So in order to stay in a place of power with your child, remaining in that place of I is brilliant. So for me, that is one of the best parts of NVC, I think, in terms of how I share it from a yes parenting perspective, because parents are so quick to isolate an unwanted behavior in their child and everything be focused on the child does this, the child that. And I love that MVC brings it back to me taking responsibility for what goes on inside of me.
Oh, yeah.
Does that, yeah.
It's what you're saying right there is what I see is such an embrace of this idea that, power and responsibility are linked, and power with is what we want with our children versus power over. And I felt like you described that brilliantly, as far as you have the money, you have the size, all this power to decide what happens to your children, and you chose a paradigm shift of working with your children, and that's I think one of the most powerful things of NVC, that method of hey, I feel this, and here are what my needs are. There's a responsibility that you're putting into words, and I think with repetition, you're taking those words being, I'm responsible for how I am. I'm not going to blame or I'm not going to put anybody else in charge of my feelings. And to me, that gives you a lot of power, and it's the power with kind of power that you need to be a good parent.
Absolutely. So I have I have a question for you, which I think is an area of NVC where I continue to kind of experience some tension, or like I feel like I'm still trying to work it out. And I recognize that it is about me. It's probably about an unmet need in me, but which is when I'm practicing NVC with someone else, and what they're throwing back at me is blame, because they're, you know, whatever is going on is causing this stuff to come out of them. I find it so hard to stay in that place of empathy when, you know, I am being responsible for my own feelings, my own needs. I'm making a positive, durable request, and then they're throwing, yeah, but you, and you know, you have all these years of experience, and I'm guessing you have also come up against that. So I would love to hear from you about how can we, when we're faced in that situation with someone who's not using NVC, how can we kind of navigate those waters where there's a different form of communication coming back at us, and we're trying so hard to stay in this place of empathy?
Oh yeah, that can be so hard when you are practicing, you know, you've gone through the effort and it becomes effortless to greater degrees as you move on, but you're genuinely wanting a sweet connection with them. You're genuinely wanting to empathize with them. So you're like, and you're curious, you know, that's part of it. It's like, hey, are you, you know, really upset because that thing happened and you really wanted more blah, blah, blah. And then that person doesn't react the way you want, because partially, maybe because they don't want to take responsibility, because it's scary for them, and just because of what they're used to. You know, what the author of the book, Marshall Rosenberg, calls it domination culture that we're raised in. And if that person has spent 30 years of their life in that domination culture, and for the first time ever, they're hearing this kind of empathy, that they're likely to either not trust it, whether that's on a conscious or subconscious level, or not even trust themselves and how to deal with it. And so if you're asking me for a couple little tidbits as to how to deal with that, yes, I see you nodding. Okay. So one of the things about MVC is we try to, you know, ask for permission before giving advice. We want to make sure we're addressing, so, you know, we're not wasting a person's time or giving them advice they don't want or need. So here, number one, I mean, it's just experience. Number one, it's like practice, you know, giving empathy even to their objection or whatever it is. If they're not quite getting it, they still want to blame somebody else for their problem. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, I see how you look at that other person and the thing that happened between you and that other person. And it's really disappointing. You wish they had done different things, don't you? You know, because you really wanted more blah, blah, blah. You wanted more truth, or you wanted more consideration or respect, or whatever the need is. That's when I say you wanted more, I'm putting the need after that, or the value. So that's the answer. That's the easy answer, as far as, like, of course, practice more, get better. But I like to, you know, and that is somewhat concrete, of course, but one thing is, okay, an epiphany that I had. Here's an example. And this is the result of practicing, and or maybe you could meditate on something like this. And it's, there's a guy that practices NVC that's been doing it as long as I have, and his name is Daryl Becker. I highly recommend looking him up on Facebook and just following him. He's brilliant. So I was listening to him in a podcast once talk about how he was giving NVC to somebody and they were just shutting him down, even, you know, attacking him, you know, verbally, calling him names and stuff. And the issue was that the idea, the image he gave me was, sometimes NVC can feel like, to another person, can feel like you're just ripping their clothes off without their permission. You're walking up to them and you're exposing them. And they, you know, and even though you're, you know, from an NVC perspective, it's like, no, we're giving them a choice, but it's actually more important in this context to let go of our perspective. And to me, that's what MVC is all about. When you do that second form of empathy that I mentioned earlier, is you're practicing letting go of your own perspective for how, you know, and it doesn't mean agreement. And this is very important. You're letting go of your assessment of what they said. So there is no disagree or agree, because you're not assessing. You're purely in their shoes. And you're like, what is it like for this person to have this opinion about this thing? Wow. And I'll tell you, this is super useful if you're debating with somebody about anything, even political debate. I have a lot of practice with that, and it just works so great because you let go of your own thing long enough to really get them. But I sidetracked here. Okay. So what I realized after hearing Daryl use such vivid imagery, of like, it's like you're ripping somebody's clothes off and violating their privacy. That helped me, because up until that point, and it was maybe, 6 or 7 years in, it's maybe 3 years ago or so that I had this epiphany. I realized when I would use NVC, and it was use NVC, it wasn't such as integrated as it is now, but I was intentionally using it with somebody, like I was curious, and maybe subconsciously, okay, that part doesn't matter. And their reaction, this didn't happen often, but when it did, it was very obvious. It was a very negative reaction. They either lied to me about if I asked about a need or something deeper, they either lied, or they refused to answer, or they dodged the question, or they told me, hey, that's none of your business, or something like that. And here's the key. My reaction to that internally was that I would judge them. And my judgment was pretty harsh. My judgment was something along the lines of either this person is so damaged that they can't look inside themselves. This person is so afraid to, distrusting of me to reveal this thing I'm asking of them about themselves, or they're a hater or something. I had these judgments. And then after hearing Daryl talk about that, I realized, oh my God, I'm not being compassionate. I'm not being, so from then on, when I would encounter that, I would remember, and I would just continue with the empathy. So I'd be like, okay, this person is just like me. They, and maybe, and what is their need here? Maybe it's privacy, and that's okay. And they, and they don't owe me anything. Something that I read into NVC is that we don't owe anybody empathy. It would be so wonderful if we would give it, but give doesn't mean obligation.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why it's a positive, doable request, not making a demand.
Oh, yeah. So
yeah.
That's, yeah. And if I can, for a moment, positive, doable request. So we had that formula again, OFNR, and, it's observation, feeling, need, request. And the request part, like you just said, I think that's so important. It's an underlying principle of NVC. We don't want people to do anything except for out of their own desire to do it. So we always request, we never demand. And we want to be real careful about the energy, the mood, the way we're feeling about asking somebody to do something, and ask ourselves, what if they say no? And if we are upset by them saying no, that means we weren't really requesting, we were probably demanding.
One of the areas that comes up with my clients in terms of parenting is that there are things that they can request of their kids, and they're okay with their kids saying no. But they say to me, but what about the things that the children have to do? For example, I have to get my child to school on time. Otherwise, they will have an unauthorized absence against them. And then when there's, I don't know, my kids don't go to school, so I don't really know the details. But for example, like when they have 4 unauthorized absences, then, there might be some kind of fine that I have to pay, some kind of I don't know, like a court, parents get taken to court because their kids are not in school on time and regularly enough. So a parent might say to me, but I've been trying the NVC thing. I mean, trying to stay in this place of acceptance and compassion and offering empathy, but actually we need to get out the door and I need my child to get to school. And within the context of the work that I do, which is, you know, MVC is just part of, you know, the bigger picture of Yes Parenting, you know, I help the parent work through that in a variety of ways. But I'm interested from an MVC perspective, and I know that you make these lovely little animations about different things like this. In that situation, how would NVC respond to that?
Yeah, that's a hard one, and especially, I mean, that specific situation is a very hard one because, you know, we could look at it from quite a few levels, from a philosophical level all the way up to a practical level. And starting from the more philosophical, this to me is a signal. If it's a thing that is like, for example, hey, I'm going to get some kind of punishment from the state if I don't force you, the child, to do this thing, you know, go to school. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's a signal that there's something wrong in that system. That's not here. I understand that's not what we're here to talk about necessarily. Mm-hmm. So stepping up to the more practical level of, you know, well, this system, I mean, there's no getting around it. Let's say it is, you know, you're living somewhere it's impossible to take your kids out of school, or you don't have the time or, you know, the resources to homeschool or unschool your child because you haven't, then for me, this is where we're sort of being forced, maybe. I mean, I'm hoping to hear from you some ideas, but in that exact situation, it's like we're sort of being forced by the state to get that kid to school. So negotiation with the child over this becomes a little more constrained than it might be over other things. And so it's where I'm feeling a discomfort right now because this is something you know, it's like we have to, and I don't even like using the word have to, but in that situation, what I would see happening is, at the very least, instead of saying to the kid, hey, we have to do this now, get your stuff together, or we got to get you to school on time, and, you know, I'm going to use force if necessary. Well, I think there's some stuff that can come before that, which is empathy. So, and really this part can be applied to any situation. I think when, you know, we're encountered with a situation where we have to, you know, there's no other option except to say no to a child, or to say, look, I need to get you in this car so we can go. It is very important. Then right there, before that happens, that we acknowledge what's going on for them. And it can be like, wow, I imagine from your perspective, you don't want to go to school. You would rather just stay home and play all day, or do the kind of learning that you can do here with me, or by yourself, with your books, with your friends, whatever things you would do that are self-directed learning. And I understand how you feel about that. And gosh, I wish there was some way around that. So that's the path that I would take, is to, and you know, and quite often, and depending on your connection with the child and how many times in the past this has happened and whatever, depending on all of that, then that might be enough. And the kid might be like, you know what, let's go ahead and get in the car and do this. And then what I skipped right there, and it may or may not be necessary, is to mention what your needs are. So that might be the next level. If you have, you feel like you've given the child as much empathy and understanding for how they feel about going to school today, as much as you can give, and they're still adamant about staying on that video game or whatever, then that's where, it's like, hey, you have needs too. And, you know, you need to express what those are to the child. And then I don't know. So now I'm really actually wondering, because I think you have more experience. While I have a daughter, you have 2 kids, and you've been doing this with your kids more than I've done with mine, because my daughter's already out of the house. So the only children I have used NVC with, besides random friends' kids at random times, is working at a daycare for a while. That was just 6 months just to practice NVC. But I know that you have way more experience, and I'm super curious to hear how you would handle, or have handled, a situation like that?
Yeah. Well, thank you for opening it back up to me. I mean, I really appreciated hearing your take on it, not least because it actually affirmed me that I have been applying NVC in a kind of a helpful way within the realms of my work. I mean, my boys did go to school for, well, Joss went to school for 15 months and Pete for 18 months when, after we came back from America and my marriage broke down, and my kids went to school then. And, you know, that was really hard, but I chose to just stay with empathy until my child was ready to go in. And if that meant I ended up getting telling off or a fine or whatever, I was like, well, my relationship with my child is more important than this system. And I was aware that, I was choosing to put my kids in school. I felt very conflicted because it was kind of caught up in the marriage breakup. But anyway, and then I made the decision that actually I was going to honor Joss's wishes and bring him out of school. And then a few months later, Pete, who wanted to be in school, then decided he wanted to be home ed. So he came out too. Within the realms of the work that I do with parents, I guess I'm bringing in other aspects, and MVC is part of that. So I talk a lot about like the first yes in yes parenting is always a yes to yourself. Like, am I meeting my own needs? Am I saying yes to my own interests and preferences? Am I saying yes to my desires where possible? Am I being clear at establishing my boundaries to protect my space, whether that's emotional, mental space or physical space? So I'm always bringing the mums that I work with back to themselves. So I would start looking at practical things like, well, how long are you spending in this tussle with your child every morning? And let's say it's 30 minutes. I would be like, well, what would happen if you got up 30 minutes earlier? So you knew that 30-minute window was there. And then you could still come from a place of empathy. You could still come from a place of, right now, this is the choice I'm making, that my child has to be in school for whatever reason. But I'm also making a choice to have a longer period of time so that my child and I can stay connected and still get to the school gates on time. So that I would be exploring what other options do we have available. And then also at the other end of school, how are we creating opportunities for our children to have a full emotional expression about their dissatisfaction with school? So, going to the playground and being able to physically work it out, or knowing that our child might have a meltdown and rage every afternoon, and that we respond to that with, understanding and acceptance and compassion, because, that's part of them expressing what's going on at school for them. So I'm always working to bring in these other elements to kind of, create a range of resources for the parents that I work with. But I'm so grateful to have NVC as part of it. I mean, because NVC is one of the foundational pillars of yes parenting. It was coming back from my time in America, having stayed with you. It was a piece of the puzzle that I hadn't consciously I know you said that it surprised you how quickly I picked it up. So subconsciously, I was already working with some of the concepts or the underlying things of NVC, but on a conscious level, it wasn't anything I'd ever come across. And as I consciously began to engage with it, then when yes parenting emerged at the beginning of 2014, the whole NVC thing, it was like there, and it was as significant as my understanding around behavior through neurolinguistic programming and other things. So it's been pivotal. You're coming into my membership group as a guest expert in a couple of weeks to talk through with the members each day for 5 days about developing this MVC practice. But you've also set up very successfully in Austin, and now you're doing it again in Acapulco, these emotional intelligence play meetups. And man, I wish there was one in Sheffield. Can you tell me a little bit about them? Because I would love to learn more about what happens at those meetups and how is that supporting people in their practice of NVC?
Yeah, the meetups were born of, so I would have these free NVC classes, maybe 2 or 3 times a year that would be like a 13-week class or a 6-week class. And from time to time, I would run into people who had been in my classes and they'd say, hey, when are you having another class? Or when are you having something where we can get together and practice what we've learned? Because I don't really get an opportunity or da-da-da. So I thought, you know what, how about a weekly meetup? And started doing that, and it really took off. And it would be pretty informal. We usually, in the beginning, for most of it, we would meet up at a restaurant that I would choose. And, you know, we would sit and eat and drink and talk, but I would impose or request a certain amount of structures. And I would guide the meetings to where we would do certain kinds of empathy exercises. And after about a year of that, I realized that, I like playing games. And I think a lot of people like playing games. And I thought, here's a great way to, for us to have a way to practice NVC that's fun and that people can take with them. So I invented a card game called Play to Evolve. And so we would sort of test play it as I was developing the game until I finally got it to the point where I can get it printed professionally. And we would test it at these meetups, these weekly meetups, which I ended up, actually I started then doing the meetups twice a week after a while because I was just so into it and people were showing up. But here's what the game, I mean, you can't really see much except it says there, Play to Evolve. So again, I called it Play to Evolve, and you can go to playtoevolve.com and order decks of this game. And basically, it stimulates deeper conversation if you're to play it without the rules even. You could just pick up a card and read it, and the card might say something like, share about a way you've affected another person. And so it prompts you to share about something about yourself or your experience that could stimulate great conversation. And then it has various rules, ways to play it, where then what the other players must do is empathize with you using the NVC formula. So it's a great way to practice. I would show up at my groups near like maybe into the second year of doing my groups. When we were play testing this game, I'd show up and we would be doing introductions and just some little bit of chit chat to warm up to each other, and then this and that. And we would start talking about NVC or somebody's experience, and inevitably somebody would be like, "Hey Scott, let's play the game. Come on, when are we going to play the game?" So I feel like it's somewhat of a success, and yeah.
Wow, it sounds brilliant. It sounds like the perfect deck of cards to take on a road trip.
Yeah, and it's playable with one person or many. Yeah. It gets bogged down a little bit when you get about 12, 15 people in there, and just because, it just gets bogged down. Mm-hmm. And I designed it for a wide range of ages. I'd say, I'm starting to think as I play it more. In the beginning, I thought, 6-year-olds can play this because I encountered a 6-year-old that could play it. But I'm thinking it's more geared toward like 10 years old and older, 9 or 10. So I'm working now on a set that's made just for kids.
Brilliant. Okay, so it's playtoevolve.com.
Yeah, thanks for,
Okay, and your website is clearsay.net, yes?
Yep.
Clearsay.net. Okay, great. I'm going to, when people get to the end of this video, there is a frame that has clearsay.net on it, and I will make sure that there is also playtoevolve.com on it, so people can easily go and find those things. So I am so excited about welcoming you into my subscription group, and but for people who are not members yet of my subscription group, or and haven't worked with you before, I really hope that people have will walk away from watching this interview with a greater sense of how they can kind of communicate with empathy, offer empathy, and, you know, begin to receive empathy. So thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge and your expertise with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I feel honored. Thanks for, I mean, to me, a very important thing, if not the most important thing, is for me is to spread NVC, or at least the idea that, hey, empathy can really help in so many situations, whether it's with your children, your mate, friends, roommates, boss, contractors, clients. I've used it in all these situations, and it has been so helpful, and it's really helped me rewire my brain to be more curious about people, to be more compassionate, more patient. It's a great exercise that's easy to do, that and also it has increased my courage to go a little bit deeper with people, to be more likely to ask questions that I know might elicit some kind of response I don't like.
Interesting. So just on that, your passion being to spread NVC and support people in it, do you offer like one-to-one NVC coaching or instruction or anything as a paid service? I mean, can people connect with you and kind of receive that support from you?
Oh yeah, I love doing that.
Okay, great. And is information about that at clearsay.net?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sure is.
Brilliant. That's good. Okay, I just want to make sure that people can get in touch with you and access that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll speak to you soon.